So this is an event of the New York Tech Alliance. It's a nonprofit industry association formed by the merger of Tech Meetup and the New York Technology Council. Our mission is to represent, inspire, support, and lead the technology community in the New York area to create a better future for all. We have over 60,000 members. Primary areas of focus are education, community building, workforce development, and advocacy. By education, we mean events such as these. We have dozens of events per year, including our monthly, is this too loud? So what do I have to do? Stand back?
Sorry about that.
How's that?
Perfect.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
Eric, okay?
A little louder.
How's that?
Excellent.
Okay. It's always a bit of a trick with this microphone. When it's right, it's perfect. It's very sensitive. Dozens of events per year, including our monthly New York Tech Meetup, which is the largest tech association event in New York City, regular event, and our CEO roundtables. We are a membership and sponsorship supported organization, so we urge you all to become members or for your organizations to become sponsors to support our work. Here are a list of our annual sponsors. I won't read them, but I'll scroll slowly through the slides so you all can do so for yourselves. Our founding sponsor, Wilson Sonsini. Our annual premier sponsor, Infor. And sustaining sponsor, Microsoft. And our supporting sponsors. A lot of sponsors. Become part of this August group. In particular, we want to give a special shout out to Anshin, our host this evening, in this very cool space. We are often here and we appreciate the support of Anshin. Adam Pizzo? Pizzo? Yeah, if you want to come up and say a few words. Let's have a round of applause for Anshin.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Adam Pizzo. I work here at Anshin. I'm the senior manager in our accounting and audit assurance group. So, a little information about Anshin. We're a 350-person accounting and advisory firm. All of our resources based in this one office here. So everyone works here. What that means is you can quickly, effectively leverage any resource in any practice group to effectively service our clients. Anshin has 6 major industry practices, one of them being professional service. Within that group, we work with technology companies ranging from early stage startup all the way through very well-established and exit-ready companies. We've had much success in taking companies through successful exits. We're able to scale with our clients from an early stage all the way through. Besides our typical accounting and tax compliance and tax returns, audit financials, we have a number of value-add practice groups that we can offer our clients. One of them is outsourced accounting, where we act as our clients' finance teams. We manage general ledger, controllers, CFO type services, and we help with management reports and operational setups. Another example, cybersecurity consulting. So we have a group that helps with the prevention, detection, and resolution of any kind of security issues that come up in companies. They also work with our clients to train employees and to help spread awareness of the importance of cybersecurity and related policies. We have other groups that focus on tax incentives, whether it's R&D, tax credits, employment credits, and the like. So thank you all again for coming. It's a little bit of information about Anshin. Thank you, Paul, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks again to Anshin for all your support. This is a presentation of the series we call our legal track. For the regulars in the audience, you will recognize that this is a series dedicated to informing and educating technology companies and small to mid-sized companies about various legal issues that they face. We also, in a sense, are speaking to founders and co-founders and potential founders, anyone who has an interest in legal issues affecting the technology marketplace. Past events have included things such as preparing for a financing, how to structure early stage financing, how to protect intellectual property, changes in patent law, and the like. I should note that all of our events are videotaped, including this one, and they are accessible on the Tech Alliance website, although they are a little bit difficult to find. Most of them are also on my law firm website, pelg.com. In particular, there's an event I would call out, which is sort of the sequel to this event, which is actually negotiating and structuring an acquisition. Whereas this is sort of the long-range planning event, the other event is the actual negotiation and structuring. If you would like to be on our mailing list for upcoming events, you can leave me a business card or leave one at the registration desk on your way out. Similarly, we have a slide deck that we'll be using this evening. If you'd like to have a copy of the deck, you can leave a business card for that as well.
When's the one on negotiating?
I'm sorry, what's it?
When is the session on negotiating?
We don't have that. We don't have that another one scheduled anytime soon. But if you go to the website, you can see the video from the one we did a few months back. By way of introduction, I'll say a little bit about myself, and I'll turn it over to the panel. Again, my name is Paul Ellis. I am a co-founder of the New York Technology Council, which is one of the organizations that merged to become Tech Alliance. I sit on the board of Tech Alliance, and I run the legal track. But my day job, I am the principal managing partner of the Paul Ellis Law Group. We are a 9-lawyer boutique here in Midtown Manhattan. We do a lot of work with small to mid-sized technology companies in areas including formation, financing, intellectual property protection, employee matters, general operations, and especially mergers and acquisitions. In the M&A space, we do a lot of work with tech companies. Some of them are companies that we formed ourselves and help them to grow. Sometimes it's companies that we represent along the way, but we do both buy-side and sell-side work. Our attorneys tend to be senior lawyers coming out of large firms and top law schools, meaning that we can offer sophisticated representation with the more personalized attention and more reasonable cost structure of a boutique New York firm. Because of the amount of work we do in the technology space, we're often able to assist beyond legal services with introductions to service providers such as accountants, recruiters, and other people that service the technology industry, as well as individual and institutional investors. I'm joined here this evening by my colleague Bart Bryden, as well as David Martin and Mark Kowal. So we're pleased to be here this evening, pleased to be part of this event. With that, I will turn it over to the panel. We have a really outstanding panel this evening. Maybe Alan I'll just
Sure.
go down the line.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome everybody. My name is Alan Wink. I run the capital markets area for Eisner & Amper. We're a global accounting and advisory firm with offices in Boston, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Miami, Dallas, Chicago, San Francisco. 6 international offices, India, Israel, Ireland, Cayman Islands, London, and Singapore. We're about 1,500 people. My responsibilities running our capital markets practice fall into 2 general areas. capital formation, helping prepare clients to raise debt, equity, mezzanine capital, and corporate finance, dealing with clients that are looking at mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, strategic alliances, joint ventures, etc. So welcome.
And my name's Steve Einstein. I'm Vice Chairman of NYTECH, which is a niche investment bank focused on knowledge-intensive businesses. We're headquartered in London, but have operations in Singapore, in Sydney, in Paris, and in New York. Our focus is principally on those businesses that have very deep, knowledge-intensive, focused consultancies, strategy businesses, technology businesses, and we provide advisory service as well as mergers and acquisition advice. By background, I also have a legal background, post-juris doctorate in tax LLM from NYU. I'm also a CPA. I've been in the private equity side. I was with John Kluge, who at the time was the world's wealthiest man. I ran private equity for him. I was a senior M&A official at Payne Weber and at Morgan Grenfell. So I have a diversified background of law, accountancy, private equity, and investment banking. All right.
Steve, first apologize to everyone. I came down with a very bad bout of laryngitis, and you wouldn't have even been able to hear me today. Now you can just hear my rasp. So I'll try to make do, not sound like Kermit the Frog. But in any event, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here with this panel. Paul is somebody who I've gotten to know last year, and over the last year we joined forces a few months ago, and I'm just delighted to be a partner of his and to lead the M&A practice at Belk. And I'm doing that as well as providing what we call general counseling advice to our clients, and it all makes sense if you think about it, because before I joined the firm, for half my career I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where you didn't even mention that, Steve, where you were for a long time, and you were one of my clients, and you are now one of my clients at NYTECH. But Steve and I worked together. Steve led the deal team, and I was one of the senior M&A lawyers there. So I have a pretty strong in-house background. I was a general counsel in another company before that, much smaller than PwC. And I started my career at two major law firms in the city. So again, what I'm going to focus on going forward, as I have in my prior career, are mergers and acquisitions transactions, but also counseling clients on whatever corporate matters they might have.
All right, thank you all. So in short, we have a panel composed of the various experts that are sort of at the key of the M&A process. Bart and I are M&A lawyers. Steve is an investment banker that works with a lot in the technology space, with financial advising and M&A work. And Alan has an accounting background, but with especially deep expertise in capital markets and advising companies and mergers and acquisitions. So that's sort of the idea of the panel, to attack this issue from the various sides with the various areas of expertise. So, in short, let's talk about the goals of today's session. Today we're here to talk about long-range planning. We're not so much focused on a particular deal, a particular transaction, how you negotiate it, how you structure it. What we're talking about is what you should be thinking about 12, 18, 24 months before the transaction. And this is an event that I've been doing for a number of years now, because I realized that a lot of my clients and companies, they focus on how do I negotiate the deal. But fewer of them focus on what should I be doing a couple of years before the deal in order to get ready. And the key is that a lot of what we're going to be talking about this evening are things that if you wait until the last minute, if you wait until you've got a term sheet or you're ready to sell, to some extent it's too late, because you've missed the opportunity to get things sorted out in an orderly way and have everything tied up with a bow when the buyer comes in. So this is things to think about over the long term. We're going to be focusing on the factors that will build value, that will make the company attractive when it comes time for a sale, that will make the process as smooth as possible. And the reason we want a smooth process is because the smoother the process, the more likely you can support the purchase price that's initially negotiated, and that you close quickly, you close efficiently, and you don't have problems that come up in the closing process. What we're talking about is equally applicable to an early stage or an established company. And I guess lastly, I'd say we can't always give you the answers, but mostly we want you to think about the questions. We want you to focus on these issues so that you are aware of them over the months and the next couple of years to come, and you are getting your company ready so that when the time comes, you'll be ready. Topics we're going to cover today, and I should say a little bit about the structure. For the most part, I'm going to run through these slides quickly initially, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel to give examples, to give particular comments, to give war stories, to answer questions, and whatever else. On some particular topics, Alan Wink is going to take over some of the accounting slides, and Steve will give a lot of input on more of the investment banking slides. In terms of Q&A, we are going to have some Q&A at the end, but we can do some as we go, although we have a lot of material to cover, so I apologize in advance if I have to cut things off from time to time. Okay? So what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to, since we have this great panel with all this capital markets expertise, we are going to spend a couple minutes talking about the state of the markets today. Then we're going to talk about choice of entity and jurisdiction and how that plays into the exit. We're going to talk about founder relations, things that need to be set up in the beginning of a company's life so that things will be smooth along the way and smooth when you get to an exit. We're going to talk about the value of industry intelligence, of being aware of what's going on in your market, in your industry, so that you are ready for an exit when the time comes. As part of that, we'll talk about how you build value in your enterprise. Then we're going to talk about outside advisors. How do you choose the team? What are the important factors to think about? We will go to accounting and tax matters, especially in the context of the diligence that comes up in a transaction. We'll talk about corporate housekeeping, that mundane work concerning annual meetings and resolutions, which generally doesn't matter that much until it does. But when it does, it really matters. We're going to talk about shareholders and their rights, especially how the shareholders agreement becomes very important at the time of an exit. We'll talk about contracts, the contracts you have with your vendors, your customers, and your partners, and how particular provisions, which may not matter much in the initial negotiation, again, can become very important in an exit. We'll talk about personnel issues, about both tax and non-tax factors that relate to your employees, about the necessity of protecting your intellectual property, and finally about the importance of compliance with securities laws. With that, we will jump in on our capital markets update, and Alan and Steve will lead that to you.
I'll kick it off, Steve. You know, it really is an amazing time now to be, looking to sell a business or looking to raise capital. It's really frothy. If you look at just the amount of venture capital, dry powder sitting on the sidelines, you're probably talking almost $200 billion. If you look at private equity, you're probably looking at $1 trillion that's got to be invested. If you know how these funds are all set up as limited partnerships, so limited partners, universities, endowments, high net worth individuals, invest as limited partners in these funds, and they want to get better than a return they can get in the bank, or get a better return they get in the stock market. So these funds need to put this money to use, and I think a lot of that is driving what we're seeing in the market today, especially from a valuation standpoint. But if you look at, last year, in the middle market, $324 billion was invested in over 2,300 deals. That's 14% more than 2016. Deal value, looking at the middle market, deals of less than $100 million accounted for over 50% of the number of transactions done last year. You look at the leverage factor, banks are beginning to lend to middle market businesses again. I'm seeing leverage at 6 times EBITDA. You're seeing total enterprise value EBITDA at about 10.5 times. That's a pretty frothy market. Steve, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing in the types of businesses that you're representing?
Yeah, but it really depends what sector you're in, and the growth characteristics of the business, the market sizing, and what competitive advantage you have. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Microphone.
This microphone? Okay. Is this better? This doesn't
it
seem to
on?
be.
I think
it is. You just have to bring you guys have to bring it here.
Hello?
Okay. Is this better? Not much. We'll do the best we can. So it's very sector specific. It's business specific. Depending on which technology you're involved in, what the market size and growth attributes of that particular segment, that'll determine what kind of multiple. But you're right. I mean, on an EBITDA basis, 10 plus is something that we see. Some of these businesses that aren't profitable yet are valued off of multiples of revenue, and those are substantial. So I think what drives this is the availability of capital and the very optimistic nature that people tend to have until the past few days with respect to the technology sector.
Because when you start looking at, even in the tech sector, and you try to put your arms around some of the valuations that you've seen for some of these later stage tech companies, the Airbnbs, the Ubers of the world, that continue to have the ability to raise larger and larger private pools of capital, there's no reason to go public. There's no reason to sell yet because the valuations are astronomical. And it's because of so much capital needing to find a home.
And do you see a lot of foreign capital as well coming in?
Oh,
For
absolutely.
these deals?
Absolutely. But the numbers I'm talking at are really the domestic, private equity and domestic, venture capital markets. The other interesting thing when you look at private equity, most of these funds are 10-year funds. So they typically spend 3 to 4 years investing in their portfolio companies, and then 6 to 7 years, building the companies and trying to execute exits so they can give capital back to the limited partners. If you look at portfolio companies today within the broad private equity spectrum, 34% have been in portfolios longer than 5 years. So those are companies that these PE groups are going to have to find exits for in the future. And whether it's selling to other large companies, but they need to find exits to create liquidity for their LPs. So that's going to be an interesting phenomenon. Is it going to stop? It doesn't look like it is. They continue to raise enormous pools of capital. Financial sponsors have raised at least $200 billion every year for the last 4 years. That's why we're seeing this great buildup. Are they getting concerned about the valuations in the marketplace today? Absolutely. I was with a very significant private equity fund up in Boston, which I'll keep nameless at this point in time, and they told me they're looking at deals that the multiples are 12 or 13 times, and they're just trying to figure out a way to make money. They're very conservative in how they're investing today. I think they're even getting a little bit turned off by some of the high multiples in the market.
And we've seen that play out in the public markets as well with regard to the technology sector. So it tends to be very fickle. It's a leading indicator what we're seeing in the public markets. There's so much capital to be deployed, and it must be deployed. So that will continue. So there's a lagging effect there. But what Alan is mentioning is it becomes difficult at certain levels to develop the proper return on your invested capital. You have to find either a greater fool to exit or really grow the business quickly. And so we're seeing that tension. But at the current time, the valuations are terrific in the sector.
And isn't it true, one trend that's happening these days is private equity selling to other private equity?
Absolutely. And you're also seeing the last 2 years has been the other phenomenon that a lot of private equity groups have now purchased venture-backed companies. I think 20% of the exits for venture-backed companies last year were to private equity groups. So it's really a crazy market right now. If you look at, some of what VCs look for in terms of their return characteristics, the model is they want to see 7 times their money in 7 years. That's why a lot of you who are entrepreneurs trying to raise money in the VC space, you're getting a whole lot more no's than you are yeses. Because if you think about, what a VC needs to do to get his return in 7 years, it's a pretty tough business, a lot of risk. Even 7 times in 7 years is only a 30% IRR, but it's still pretty significant. But that's what they're looking for every day in the market.
And the reason why they look for that, there are a lot of failures in the VC community, so that offsets the portfolio upside. I'm actually on the board of the Women's Venture Capital Fund, which focuses on gender diversity, and not women-only owned businesses, but businesses that are operated by men and women being in the senior positions in those businesses. So there's a very strong focus there in terms of a social agenda. And we see that if you have 2 or 3 deals that succeed, you'll have at least as many that will fail. And that's why you need to set to 7 times over 7 years, 30+% internal rate of return on projected investment performance.
And I guess the other part of that, and Steve's 100% right, the venture capital business and the private equity business is really, the business is a third. A third of the investments get back 0, they write it off. A third of the investments, they'll get the return of capital. So if they invested $15 million, they'll get $15 million back. It'll be over 7 to 10 years. A third of the investments give them the return that justifies the fund return, that they're getting a 10x, a 15x, a 20x return. That's the business.
All right, so thank you for that. So that's where you're all headed. So now let's figure out how we get there. Let's talk about, for just a moment, about the process of selling the company, because that'll frame the rest of the conversation this evening. How does it go down? Well, first, obviously, you have to have a potential purchaser. Now, that may be someone that approaches you, they may come out of the blue. It may be someone that you find with the assistance of an investment banker. It may be a company that if you know your industry, you'll know who the potential buyers are. But one way or another, you identify the purchaser. The next stage is going to be negotiating the deal at a high level by means of a term sheet or a letter of intent, LOI as we call it, to create the floor plan for the deal. This sets up the deal at a very high level. What's the purchase price? Is it a stock sale or an asset sale? Is there going to be a holdback for an escrow? What's being sold? Are liabilities coming along? Are there employment agreements? I mean, just what ancillary agreements? I mean, the list goes on and on of things that may come up in the LOI. Once the LOI is negotiated and signed, then a couple of things, at least or more, happen generally simultaneously. On the one hand, you start the due diligence process. For those who are not familiar with that, diligence is the way in which the buyer is going to try to learn everything about your company. Finances, they'll want to see your financial statements, they'll want to know all about the business, who your customers are, your customer lists, they'll want to know about your intellectual property, they'll want to have lawyers and technical people look at your IP, they'll want to know whether there's any litigation outstanding, they'll want to see all your contracts, they'll want to know that there's a good chain of title to the IP. I mean, the list goes on and on. It is a very, very deep dive that the buyer will do in order to understand what they're buying. And a lot of what we're talking about this evening is getting ready for that process of due diligence. because you do want to be ready. You don't want to be turning over all of those documents and all that information without knowing what's in there and knowing that things are more or less buttoned up to the extent you can. At the same time, if there are regulatory issues to be addressed, that'll happen as well at that point. And finally, and along with the diligence, we'll be actually documenting the transactions. You'll take the LOI, that'll be turned into a full-blown set of definitive documents, which will be heavily negotiated, and then closing the deal. So at a high level, that's the process at the end game. What we're talking about is how to get ready for that. So what's going to influence that? Well, one thing is, to some extent, what Alan and Steve were just talking about, is knowing where the market is, knowing what the market looks like, knowing when the time is right for an exit, knowing who your potential buyers are. Ideally, you have some kind of a process, or maybe you have at least more than one buyer who's interested in your company. If you can get a competitive process going, in most cases that will be to your benefit as a seller. But the way you do that is by knowing who the buyers are and sometimes having to initiate that process yourself or with an investment banker. Along with knowing who the buyers are, knowing what they're looking for and being able to deliver on that. What are the buyers looking for? Are they interested in your revenues? Are they interested in your IP? Is it your customer list? What is it? And being able to deliver the assets that they're most interested in buying. And then finally, that you have a smooth process. If there are surprises along the way in that negotiation and closing, generally those will be to your disadvantage as a seller. Once the LOI has been negotiated and signed, generally the purchase price only goes in one direction, and that's down. So if stuff comes up in diligence that's a problem, that's going to hurt you. So these are all the things that you want to focus on long before you get to the LOI stage. You guys,
I guess, one comment, and Paul, you're 100% right. Usually when you go through due diligence, what is the buyer looking for? He or she's looking for, adjustments to EBITDA. And as you know, the adjustments never go up.
never.
And if you think about, a deal that sells at a 10 multiple, every $100,000 adjustment is $1 million in purchase price. And what I've been seeing become more commonplaces in the market today is sellers going through a sell-side due diligence process before they even put themselves on the market. So they have an opportunity to bring in a third party to basically go through a due diligence just like a buyer would do, but we're doing it from the seller's perspective before the fact, in the hopes of identifying some of the issues that might be part of the due diligence once an LOI is signed. And I think it's becoming more common. I think it's money well spent because the return's pretty high. Steve, I don't know if you
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Being proactive as opposed to being reactive is very much to your advantage. So proactivity, the sell side of reverse due diligence is something where you can anticipate a buyer's issues with regard to the business, with regard to its business strategy, the numbers, be able to address them with the luxury of time, and being able to strategically focus their attention on the key performance indicators of the business as opposed to some of the negatives that they may see that negatively impact value. When I, relating to the general topic here about preparation, which is, how do you think about selling the business, how do you monetize your startup in the technology business? John Kluge used to tell me, Steve, when I proposed various businesses, and there were some very large businesses, most of them in the multi-billion-dollar range, he would say, so who are you going to sell it to in 3 to 5 years? I said, what do you mean? He said, if you don't have the exit thought through, at inception, I'm not going to put up the first dollar. So understand where the industry's going, who the likely players are, and how you're going to position the business itself for sale. And we'll get into that a little bit further into the discussion. But you should know, what's attractive about your business and who that's going to be attractive to, who's the best buyer, and that's very important aspect of this whole discussion we're having tonight.
Yeah, and I just from a sort of a lawyer's perspective, I think what I would just add is I think if you're a seller, it's very helpful to have a term sheet or an LOI in place before you start trying to negotiate the real deal documents. It does sort of set the parameters for the deal. I mean, yes, you're gonna have to work out the details later, but you'll be able to ferret out early on, excuse me, whether there are any sort of fundamental disagreements with your buyer that's gonna crater the deal or gonna create real problems for yourself. And better to do it early, I think, than late go down that road and then have to try to renegotiate or find that you put a lot of time and effort and expense into it. So you're not gonna get everything done, but I think it's very helpful. The other thing about diligence is typically that won't start from a buyer's perspective until you've signed an LOI or a term sheet. I mean, what's interesting though is buyers these days, I think, want to try to do some early diligence if they can, to sort of figure things out before they even get to them signing the LOI. And for a seller, that's a tricky question, right? Because you want to have some indication that they're really interested, you know, so it's a bit of a dance, and you really don't want to open up the kimono too much. And you may have to show them something, but you're going to try to resist that as much as possible, at least until you get beyond the term sheet LOI stage.
You know, and just to add to that, you know, in non-tech businesses where, you know, a buyer comes in and probably the most important thing they want to see is, you know, your customer list.
Right.
And I've seen, you know, sellers that have provided, you know, customer lists with dollar amounts but no names. You know, here are my top 10 customers or top 50 customers. So, you know, you see there's no customer concentration, but you're not giving them the specific customers that you're selling to, especially when it's a strategic buyer, you know, who you're talking to. So you have to be careful about that, and also, you know, making sure you have the right confidentiality agreements in place, you know, way before you even get to these discussions.
Right.
All right, moving on. We're going to try to move a little bit quickly here. We have to do about 4 minutes a slide, so
Okay.
we've got a lot of material here. We try to keep these rich, but that means we've got to move fast. Okay, entity and jurisdiction. This is obviously an early issue that gets considered in the life of your company, probably the first issue. The reason we bring it up now is because when I have tech companies that come in and they want to, you know, they say, I want to form a company, this is what I'm doing, a lot of them will say, well, you know, should I be a C Corp? That seems to be what everyone does. You know, start as a C Corp. I think I'm going to bring in VC financing, et cetera, et cetera. For many companies, that may be the right answer, but not necessarily. And I always, you know, want to explain to people to think through the process a little bit, because there are many good reasons to be a C Corp. One of the most important ones is that if you want VC financing, you almost certainly will need to be a C Corp. If you don't start out as a C Corp, you will convert to a C Corp. However, if you do not bring in VC financing, and you do not, and you start as an LLC, and you do not, and you get to an exit without having converted to a C Corp, there can be meaningful tax advantages to exiting as an LLC rather than a C Corp, not to mention the tax advantages along the way. So I think it's always important, especially as a startup entrepreneur, to think through that issue a little bit. Speak with your lawyer, speak with your accountant, understand the implications of it so you make the right choice. And Alan, you might want to speak a little bit on the tax implications.
You know, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, most VCs, or maybe all VCs that I've ever dealt with, insist on investing in a C Corp. You know, there's no saying that if you start as an LLC, you can convert. Because at the end of the day, VCs want to invest in great businesses, and at that early point, you know, whether it's a C Corp or an LLC probably is not that critical to them. So, you know, think about what's in your best interest from a tax perspective, and this is something we could talk about for 2 or 3 hours, because it really is, it's situation by situation. You know, the one important thing, if at some point, you know, when you think about formation, and if you think about, you know, a public company acquiring your business, they're probably going to want to acquire a C Corp and not an LLC. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but once again, it's situation by situation. And I do suggest that you do consult your tax advisor or your attorney as you're setting up your company.
You've been referencing a lot private equity and venture capital. There's a lot of other folks that are not in that schematic. What is the percentage of businesses, you know, brokered over the course of a year, M&A deals that are not, or purchased, buying a business, if you will, that are non-VC owned or private equity? Isn't there a lot?
No,
I mean,
of
the
course
world
there-
is far not.
No,
just
well, absolutely.
exclusively-
You know, there
yeah.
are many ways to fund
Yeah.
a business. I think we're all enamored by, you know, some of the great VC-backed companies that we all read about every day. But, you know, once
a lot
again,
of
as an early stage company, you have to get, if you're gonna build a business, you have to get access to the permanent capital. You know, when you have a young startup company, and I see a representative from Silicon Valley Bank like back there, you know, they're not gonna lend to you with a company that has no customers, you know, no revenues, no profits per se. You know, you have to raise capital some way. And if you're an entrepreneur who has big ideas for your company, sometimes partnering with a venture capital brings a lot more expertise than just money. They bring a lot of great advice for you. They build companies over the years. So, you know, there are other ways to build a business, don't get me wrong, but if you're really gonna build a great company, venture capital is a great asset to have.
But, I mean, the broad view of the market, there are strategic investors / acquirers, and there are financial investors acquirers, depending on where the financial investor is in terms of what stage, whether they VC or they private equity, you know, buyout firms. It is a subclassification within PE. But strategics can also fund, and I think that's where you're going with your question, investment. They can make minority investments. They enter into joint business relationships with the startup. They can license technology. There are other ways of getting capital in. I mean, it's a spectrum
Or
of
I know
opportunities.
plenty of successful organic growth businesses.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Plenty of them. that
Yeah,
I
to
work
the
with.
extent that
Yeah.
they're self-funding,
Yeah.
that's fine. But to the extent that external capital is needed or access to other distribution channels, marketing channels, et cetera, you may want to reach out to a strategic or financial party to assist, accelerate.
And I think that was sort of the point I was trying to make, is that if you can bootstrap your way to an exit and you are an LLC, again, there can be advantages to exiting as an LLC. Although, as Alan was quite right, it's very situational, it's very specific, and it's hard to tell at the beginning of the life cycle of the company what the right choice is. I think the takeaway here is this is not something for a knee-jerk reaction. I need to be a C Corp. Speak with your accountant, speak with your lawyer, figure it out. Just a couple of other points on the slide. Generally, Delaware is your best choice of jurisdiction, unless your business is very small and very local, and it's not, you're not going to be taking in any investment. In most cases, Delaware is the right choice. Consider segregating lines of business if you expect that you may be spinning off a particular line of business rather than selling the whole company. It does not necessarily make sense for startup companies, but along the way, that may be something you want to consider doing. All right, founder relations.
Paul, one other comment about, you know, sort of spinning off a company. I think one of the things that I would encourage everyone, and no matter where you are in the business life cycle with your entity, try to be diligence ready at all times. And, you know, in terms of your legal documents, of your, you know, your financial and your bookkeeping, make sure you can stand up to a due diligence at any point in your life cycle. Because sometimes, you know, you get that phone call or that knock on the door with an opportunity you can't turn away from. And if you're ready for that, you're probably going to get a higher price, and it's just going to be an easier process for you. So I encourage people, to the best of their ability, to be diligence ready from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. So once you've formed your company, or in the process of forming a company, something important to get right in the beginning and to get buttoned down is issues among the founders. If these are not sorted out in the beginning, they can cause big problems down the line. And I say that because too often I see companies that, a group of founders, they may have formed their company, but they didn't really figure out exactly what the equity percentages were, or they had side deals that were not properly committed to paper, or any number of issues. And then as the company grows and develops and becomes more valuable, people's memories get a little bit vague in terms of what those side deals were, and what that oral agreement that they had really was supposed to mean. So it's very important to get these things buttoned down properly in the beginning. Equity percentages is usually the most important one. And make sure the equity gets issued, and it gets issued in a manner that everyone agrees, and that there aren't side deals that are not committed to paper. We always recommend for co-founders that you put in place reverse vesting. That's the process whereby the founders get their equity, but if they leave the company early, they forfeit a portion of that equity. So if they start a company after 6 months, one of the partners leaves, they have to give up a portion of their equity to the founders who stay. Titles and roles, make sure those are well defined in the beginning, and there should be a mechanism for dispute resolution. On several occasions, I've seen companies that had 50-50 ownership structures that came to me after they'd been formed, and they got into a dispute, and it really could tear the company apart, because there's no easy way sometimes to resolve those disputes if you don't have a dispute resolution mechanism built into your shareholders agreement or your LLC.
Yeah, and I would just add, I don't think there's anything that's more off-putting to a prospective buyer than coming into a company that they're interested in and finding out, well, we never quite papered, over or figured out the equity split. We kind of know what it is. We'll figure it out now. Don't worry, we'll take care of it before the deal is over. It's like, no, that's really not going to fly. Like, you got to know who owns what, right? You got to know. I mean, even you're certainly not going to be able to do a stock sale in that situation, or an equity sale in that situation. Maybe you'd be willing to do an asset sale, but again, it just is a harbinger. Like, these guys don't really have their act together. There may be disputes amongst them. A prospective buyer is just going to be totally turned off by that. So it seems so simple, but I've seen plenty of deals. I mean, I remember, I think there were 1 or 2 in PwC where we were interested in buying a smaller firm, and it wasn't set up properly. We said we just can't deal with this.
Yeah, so fundamentally strong businesses we would have to work on. I didn't mention this part much. I was global head of corporate development at PricewaterhouseCoopers for many years, both here in the U.S. and did all the transactions around the world. And there were a number of businesses that were not sale ready. There was not a clear alignment with shareholders. They did not dot their I's and cross their T's in terms of what the items that Paul was mentioning, in terms of legal housekeeping, and that's created significant problems for them because we just walked on the deals.
Yeah.
I've noticed some deals, they have undiluted shares, some founders keep, and that becomes a problem in the end, because when do you dilute it? It's just informal way they would have made the deal. So some founders say, oh, I'm not going to dilute my shares till the end. And then, there is a conversion issue comes up. So I think that's one of the
It's usually dealt with through negotiations. It's
Yeah, it creates a
mathematical
problem.
Calculation. It creates an issue, but there are many other issues in getting a transaction done. It depends how badly they want to get the deal done, and what level of value they anticipate, and how much the other's going to give. It's one pie, it's just how you divide up the pie.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a buyer, they're going to say either, and they're buying the equity, then they're going to want to buy, either on a fully diluted basis, or they're going to say, you guys work it out. You can give up your options and whatnot, but we don't want to have to deal with that. So you just get it, figured out now, and then we will buy 100% of the outstanding equity.
Quick question for you. If you're set up where you have a certain amount of shares in treasury, then you're coming up onto a sale, does it make more sense to then allocate those prior to the sale, as to however you distribute it, if you're 33, and 33%, Do you do that before, or does it matter when you do the sale? Is it
I'm
inconsequential?
going to defer to Alan in a minute, but I can't imagine that it matters at all.
Yeah.
If you have 33, 33,
Yeah.
33, you can add more shares, but the percentage ownership is the same.
Same, right.
Then the proceeds
No
get
issue.
divvied up in the same manner, so it should be no effect at all.
And I agree with Steve's comment, but I think the one underlying factor here is just make sure you document your relationship with your shareholders.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that difficult to do. You have an agreement when you come together as partners. You know, just put it in writing, make sure the agreements are done, so, you know, an investor or buyer comes in and fully understand.
I think there's a later slide where we'll get into that a little bit more as to the kind of things you need to think about for those agreements. But yeah, it's really important.
I mean, one overriding factor, I'd say, if I could give a subtitle to this topic, it would be, time is not your friend. So, you know, you should get these things documented at the beginning, because if you let them delay, they will never get easier. They will only get harder. So if you try to kick something down the road, you and your partners can't really agree on something, say, well, we'll deal with that later. It's not going to get easier. It's just going to get harder. So we talked about, so delay only adds complications, commit informal understandings to signed agreements. Alan mentioned proper shareholders agreement or LLC agreement, and get advice of counsel. Okay, industry intelligence. So this goes to, you know, knowing when the time is right to sell, and knowing when a good deal comes along. So from time to time, someone will walk into my office and say, you know, I just got a term sheet, or so-and-so told me they wanted to buy my company, and they offered X price, or so-and-so told me they wanted to buy my company, they didn't specify a price. And they're saying, you know, is it a good deal? How much should I ask for? You know, and you know, obviously we can help them, or someone like, you know, Stephen can help them, or, you know, we can help them to answer those questions. But these are questions that ideally you, as the CEO of the company, you understand your industry, you understand your market, you know who your competitors are, and you know what kind of deal activity is going on out there. So when, as Alan says, the term sheet lands on your door, lands in your inbox, you can say, that's a good deal. I want to go after that one, or not a chance. You know, this is not a deal I'm interested in. And all of that, you know, that's industry intelligence. That's knowing about your industry, knowing about your market, knowing about your company, and so that you're armed with the information to make a good deal when the time comes along.
And I think also, you know, you led off, Paul, with the idea of, you know, whether the offer is fair, the price. There is so much data out there. Not having access to data is not an excuse. You know, if you think about whether it's a public company deal or a private company deal, you know, publications like PitchBook, Capital IQ, there's a really good database in Philadelphia called GF Data that talks about private equity investment or venture capital investment in private companies. You should have a pretty good idea of what how the market has valued your business, even from a private company perspective.
Steve, do you?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot more than just multiples applying them to your business's characteristics to come up with an applied valuation. You should understand in whatever industry segment your business is situated what the key performance indicators are. You know, what are your unique value propositions within your business? What provides you with competitive differentiation against others that might be in the same segment, addressing the same market needs? You know, what kind of synergy value, strategic value would you bring to particular parties? So now we're thinking about the strategic world as opposed to, you know, the private equity world, although private equity could be quasi-strategic if they have a portfolio company in a complementary or adjacent space that they bring in, they could realize synergies within their portfolio. You know, we have you know, a comment here, what acquisition activity is occurring and on what terms. Going beyond that, as far as comps that you'll see, the comparable transactions that you'll see in these databases that Alan referred to, you know, aside from the valuation, what's the structure that you're trying to achieve? You know, how much is deferred consideration, how much is payable at closing, how much is in cash, how much is in equity, how does the equity vest, and many other factors relating to the overall transactional structure need to be considered. Trends within your industry, convergence, digital disruption, non-traditional strategic buyers that are coming to the table now and thinking about new models and transforming their businesses in a way that your technology startups can assist them in driving future revenues as opposed to enhancing or deepening their past business model is something to think about. So, knowledge is power. Knowledge is a critical component to successful exit. Knowledge is a critical component to running your business well from an operational point of view.
So I have a question. I mean, we're talking about comparables a lot, other companies in the industry. What if your business is truly quite a niche business or virtually unique? How do you then go about trying to evaluate it?
It's more difficult to do. Comparables are our best estimate based on publicly available data of who's comparable. And there may be private companies that may be somewhat comparable because they're early stage technology companies. There's no information on them in the marketplace, so you can't derive much information from a valuation perspective. You do the best you can. If you think you have a truly unique business, then you try through analogy to evaluate against businesses that have the same financial and operational characteristics to the business that you have. Yes?
Do you see a shorter path to exit in AI-based companies lately?
What kind of path?
Artificial intelligence-based companies.
No, that's gonna be
Do you feel that there is a shorter path now to exit and not 7 to 10 years or 5 to 10 years?
I would, if I invested as a private equity investor or a venture capital investor in AI technology, would expect a shorter path, certainly not 10 years. You have to take a look at the competitive advantage period for these technologies. I mean, you may have RPA, robotic process automation, at the front end of the...
I feel that some of this AI technology, if it's not purchased by a big buyer after 3 years, is obsolete. Because of the competition that is developing the same.
That's possible. I mean, it's certainly a hot area. There's a lot of capital being deployed in the area. There are a lot of incredibly smart data scientists and others that are studying, how to, create a viable AI framework and environment. I met with a public large private company just the other day, this week, on this acquisition strategy relating to AI. You can't use a traditional 7-10-year type exit on that. Of course not. And it's an emerging technology. I don't think anybody's found the silver bullet, the holy grail, whatever you'd like to call it, of AI. It's something that'll be developed over the years. On the front end, like an RPA type technology, and these are the bots that automate repetitive tasks so that we can reduce labor forces in companies. It's a technology that I think will have a relatively short lifespan because it'll be commoditized over a relatively short time frame. If you talk about true AI, beyond cognitive computing, then I think it'll have a longer lifespan, but strike while the iron's hot. The advice.
Yeah, I'm talking
So
about
I think we're going to, I'm sorry, we're going to keep moving. Steve, do you want to, you touched on this next slide a little bit. Do you want to?
Sure, and I'll try to keep it really short. I'm New Yorker, so I can speak quickly.
Well, because there's good stuff at the end, too.
I'll speak quickly. So this is about metrics that drive purchase price, how to build value in an enterprise. So you'll see that the slide has a number of metrics. Revenue and EBITDA are the two metrics that are used. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a proxy for cash flow of a business. And frequently the amount is adjusted for certain adjustments that wouldn't be incurred in connection with a potential acquirer and investor, so it could be more or less. Here I think one point I would make is size and scale and growth characteristics of the business drive value. It's not just the revenue or the EBITDA, it's how quickly you're growing those numbers and what kind of margins that you're getting versus the competitive marketplace. So that's the comment there. Intellectual property, there are various components in IP, trademarks, copyrights, patents, processes, I think it's beneficial to the extent that you have a really good understanding of what they are. If we're talking about patents, copyrights, the things that are protected intellectual property, work closely with your lawyers to understand what claims can be made there, what the nature of the claim is, so that if anybody coming in to invest or buy your company has a really good sense that you have your IP in order. The user base here is, and I'll combine that with customers and significant accounts. I mean, one concern is concentration, and lack of dispersion in accounts. So if you're too reliant on a particular client, that's problematical. If that customer comprises 70–80% of your revenue, even if it's growing beautifully, you can see the significant risk that the investor would have if they came in, and there would be a discount there, typically, to the pricing of the transaction in that sense. What's the nature of the composite of your customer account? Are they blue chip clients? Is the revenue recurring revenue, or is it episodic in nature? Recurring revenue gives comfort to investors. Episodic, we don't know if you're going to be able to repeat the past successes. The strength of the management team, which isn't mentioned here, but is very important, that you have management aligned and going to be retained through incentive programs or otherwise with the business once there's an investment or there's a transfer of control. And has the business over time, in terms of building enterprise value, made investments in infrastructure, and that can be to fund growth, of course, but in the areas of sales, delivery centers or otherwise. But what infrastructure do you have to scale? Because scalability, right, is a very, very important component of delivering value with companies that are in the startup phase. And to the extent that you're not scalable, those constraints, once you hit the inflection point, that you plateau in terms of your market share or your ability to penetrate into larger accounts, is going to be a very negative impact on your overall value. So those are my thoughts around that slide.
Thanks. And slide 12, Steve, you touched on some of that already.
Sure. Factors that build value. And yeah, I did. I'll use a slightly different paradigm that we have here. But I think clarity and your ability to articulate a viable growth plan certainly enables you to build value and be able to deliver against that growth plan. My firm, NYTECH, developed a proprietary set of IP around how to build value, what is called an equity growth wheel. And if you look at the market proposition, sales and profit growth, client relations, quality of fee income or other income generated, the IP, sales and marketing, loyalty of the customers, and the quality of the management team. If you focus on each of those, and we discuss each of them for an extended period of time, that's how you build value. If you have a strong management team, strong sales and profit growth, and have recurring revenue streams with your customers. Those characteristics that I just laid out are the characteristics of a successful business. And it requires tremendous attention and focus to be able to deliver against all of that. But that's the nirvana of achieving optimal value for your business.
All right. So outside advisors, I'm not going to spend too long on this because I think it's relatively straightforward. But bottom line is you need to get the right team in place. There certainly can be value to getting people in place as lawyers, financial advisors, and accountants that understand your industry, that have specific knowledge about your industry. Right size. Not every deal requires a PwC or a Skadden Arps. Sometimes you're better off with a smaller advisor who will take your deal seriously, shall we say, and take you seriously as a client. You'll make sure that you're going to get enough mind share of your advisors and that they will be there for you to get your deal done. There's sort of somewhat of a trade-off between risk and cost, and make sure there and no conflicts. You obviously want to make sure that your advisor isn't representing the other side. Although, as lawyers, lawyers are prohibited from getting involved.
Yeah.
it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think I would just add on a couple of these points, the industry-specific expertise. I mean, clearly, that's particularly helpful if you're in an industry like a healthcare or a pharma or something that, really requires, some, at least from a lawyer's perspective, some real in-depth understanding of that particular industry. There may be other, industries that are probably a little more ecumenical and don't require, a heavy-duty knowledge about that particular area. So it sort of depends what you're involved in. In terms of risk versus cost, I mean, I think you touched on that, Paul, but I mean, I think it's, obvious that often, the larger, more complex transactions will merit larger, costlier teams to be put in place, right? Because it's just the nature of the beast, and there's also sort of a bet the firm, aspect to all that. However, I think it's true also that in many smaller deals, that incurring that kind of cost doesn't necessarily balance with the risk. It's just, if you're selling a piece of your business or whatever, having to take on, the PwCs, whatever of the world, is probably, it's unnecessary from a risk perspective. So just something to bear in mind that is really very contextual and where your business is in the sort of lifespan as to who you really should sort of work with.
All right.
No disrespect to my former employer.
Well, perhaps I should have chosen another.
Yeah, I should have said Ian Wong.
So, Alan, slide 14, can I turn that over to you?
And I think this is, we're probably beating a dead horse on this one. I think we've already addressed it. Make sure your accounting books and records are in order. If you are having an audit or a review done, make sure it's a reputable firm that people are going to recognize the financial statements, whoever signed the opinion. You want to make, a couple of, housekeeping items. We talked about it before. Make sure your cap table, your distribution of shares is accurate and up to date. Most important thing that probably results in many EBITDA adjustments is the whole area of revenue recognition. So make sure your revenue recognition policy is correct and enforced. State and local taxes have become an issue, so make sure all your state, local, federal filings are all complete and up to date. And once again, I think if you can show that you are well organized financially and you're prepared for a transaction, you might even get a little bit higher of a multiple in terms of the purchase price. So show that you're financially smart.
Yeah, I mean, I know in diligence, it often comes up, especially when the accountants get involved, that, a lot of small companies do not pay adequate attention to matters of sales tax. I mean, if they're operating in a lot of different states, it's just not something that's high on their, and you're operating in the virtual world. It's just not high on their list of priorities yet. It's something that a bigger buyer is probably going to be caring about, right? And it's a messy situation, and maybe the risk isn't overwhelming, but it's still something that a buyer's going to be concerned about. So again, something to maybe think about sooner than later.
And it's gotten more complicated after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on Wayfair. So you have more than 1,200 jurisdictions that assess sales tax in the U.S., and it'll be interesting to see how those internet-based companies assess tax and collect it, and how they hold up to audit.
And that probably dovetails into our next slide, Paul. We talk about the dichotomy between tax strategies and GAAP. A lot of privately held businesses are run for tax efficiency rather than reporting GAAP earnings. And I think you want to make sure that you are GAAP compliant if you're contemplating going through a sale or looking to raise capital. I was working with a business, in fact, we're still working with them now, that ironically was not GAAP compliant. And as we were talking to potential buyers, and some of the potential buyers might be public entities, that's certainly not going to fly. So they had to make numerous adjustments in their accounting and record keeping to become GAAP compliant. You know, we mentioned, you know, revenue recognition, we spoke of that earlier, you know, a key factor that you have to make sure is right.
And the rules there just were changed, it got more complicated, so it's important to make sure that your accounting firm is keeping you on a compliant basis.
You know, there's an overriding point on diligence, whether it's accounting or legal or business, that's worth mentioning, which is sort of the mindset of how diligence works out. Because we've all been on either side. We've worked on the sell side, we worked on the buy side. And for the seller's advisors, when they start to look at a company, if everything is clean and buttoned up, and the financials are in place, and the corporate records are in place, and the contracts, and boom, 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 it starts to, you know, we do our job, but it starts to become a little bit of a check-the-box exercise. You know, okay, they got that, they got that, they got that, you know, and everything falls into place, and you're humming along, and everything's great. When you start to hit bumps, when something isn't right, or the financials are out of order, or whatever, you know, then you say, okay, well, wait, things aren't quite right here. And then you may start to dig a little bit deeper, and other stuff comes to light. And so what was sort of a virtuous circle where you were just sort of spiraling up into the heavens becomes sort of a downward slide as the buyer's advisors smell blood, you know, and they start, you know, sniffing around a little more deeply. And it's a little bit psychology, but you know, as a seller, it's something you need to keep in mind, because it is to some extent the way these things work. Anyway, that brings us to corporate housekeeping. So, you know, done right, corporate housekeeping is relatively mundane. What are we talking about? They require meetings under your state law and under your bylaws, proper documentation of corporate action, proper documentation of equity issuances, and the like. Relatively simple stuff if you do it right, if you do it timely, if it's properly documented. However, if you get it wrong, or if you don't do it, it can be a real mess. I think, you know, Bart and I were working on a deal some months back where we were representing the seller. You know, I should hasten to add, a seller that came to us just as they started the sale process.
Right.
And this company had, I kid you not, 4 different statements of capitalization filed with the government. You know, 2 different there were 4 different statements of how the ownership was split up for this company. 2 with Delaware, 1 with the IRS, and I can't remember what the other one was, Bart. And it was just outrageous. And you know,
well, and beyond that, there were 2 companies really, and we were working on the sale of the equity of the main one, and there was going to be like a little sale of assets of the other one, but it turned out, as the buyer looked into it, they couldn't really figure out which entity owned what assets. So the upshot was that we had to restructure the deal at the very last minute from a stock sale, an equity sale, to an asset sale, which, believe me, is again something you really want to avoid if you can.
yeah, and again, something that could have been handled easily and inexpensively slowed down the deal and, you know, added tens of thousands of dollars to the costs in terms of legal and accounting fees in order to get it all sorted out. So again, get it, if you do it right the first time, you will be happy, much happier. And I think we basically covered the rest.
I'll add one other thing to that. You know, when we talk about corporate housekeeping, the other thing you have to remember is, even though, you know, you're going through a process to potentially sell your business, you still have to run your company day to day. And I know, and I don't know about my other 2 panelists, I've seen so many deals that have cratered, you know, 10 months after the process started because the performance of the company went south quickly, because the owner or management team took their eye off the ball. So even though there's a lot of stuff going on, at the end of the day, don't lose sight of the fact you're still running a business.
Well, and again, I think to the extent you're prepared ahead of time to undergo the process, which is again something you have to accept and devote some time to, you know, sort of pay me now or pay me later. And how many times have we seen owners get involved in the M&A process and they're not ready, and so this is the first time they've gone through it, and it becomes this, nail extraction exercise for them. It's they find it quite unpleasant, but a lot of it is because, things have to be addressed now, and they can't do that and take care of their business. So they just feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and it doesn't need to be that way if you just put a little prep time into it beforehand.
So we will move on. If anyone has to leave early, make sure you leave your business card if you'd like a copy of the deck or if you'd like to get onto the address, the email list. We talked about the importance of the shareholders agreement or the LLC agreement. A couple of things that are important here. Again, things that may not matter until the exit comes along. The rights of the shareholders. You don't want to be in a position at the time of the exit where you don't have, for example, drag-along rights. Drag-along rights are the provision that says that if some percentage of the shareholders, it may be a majority, maybe 2/3, it could be more, if a majority or a supermajority of the shareholders or equity holders want to sell the company, then everyone else has to go along. It's a key provision because you don't want to be in a position where one or two recalcitrant shareholders can block a deal or can hold up the company and say they want some special rights in an acquisition. So again, it's a provision that doesn't matter for most of the life of the company, but becomes really important at the end. And so when your company is formed or when the shareholders agreement is amended or revised, that's something to take a look at. And make sure that you have the right provisions in that document, in the LLC agreement, that will ease the path when it comes time for an exit. And again, as we noted before, it's one of those things, if you don't take care of it early on, when it can be easily agreed upon, it's not something that's easy to sort out at the end, right before deal. Also, I wasn't sure exactly where to throw this in, but strategic investors, we talked a little bit about the difference between strategic investors and financial investors. When you have strategic investors in your company, be aware of the impact that they may have on an exit. Strategic investors can add a lot of value to your company because beyond money, they'll bring contacts, expertise, credibility, but they also bring a risk, because if the market starts to perceive that your company is captive of, name the big tech company that has a 10 or a 20% interest in your company, then that may chill your exit opportunities. And companies that would have been potential buyers will not be interested because some other companies already has their foot in the door. So again, it's something to be aware of. There can be a lot of value to a strategic investor, but be cautious of what it can mean for an exit.
And the kinds of things that a strategic investor might insist on are restrictions on your ability to sell to competitors, for instance, competitors of theirs. They may not want to sell the company to private equity. They may not like that exit strategy. They might not fit within their scheme of things. And they might also insist on a right of first refusal, which I think we're going to touch on in the next slide. But that will sort of give them basically first dibs on any exit deal, and that would certainly limit your options.
And
How to avoid the situation where a strategic investor is asking exclusivity on the product?
Is asking what?
Exclusivity on the use of the product, yeah.
Well, I say just say no. I mean, look, it's always, and we come to that issue on another slide, but I'll say now, there are provisions in your contracts that your counterparties will get into your contracts, and there may be a moment of truth, in terms of whether you want that deal, you need that business, it's a great opportunity for you, but they want a provision that could be painful for you down the road. And you may have to make a choice. that the only way they're gonna do that deal is if they get that exclusivity. And you may have to decide how important is that deal to you, to limit your opportunities in the future. I mean, it's a negotiation.
You might be able to negotiate the exclusivity so that it's not a true one, but maybe for certain sectors, certain geographies, certain whatever, that, it's sort of a, you split the baby kind of thing.
Certain applications.
Yeah, exactly. So it may not be an absolute.
Time limited sometimes.
Exactly.
But it all comes down to the value equation. If they take out the full value of the business, you can grant them exclusivity. More power to them. But I mean, they can't get it on the cheap by entering into an
Yeah,
investment.
but if they're putting 10% into your company and they say, then we want to get you all your product.
With a startup, it's all about optionality and it's being agile and having various alternative options that can optimize your value or take you in the direction that you'd like to go. To the extent that anything you do constrains that, you're damaging the value of your business. Any questions?
Same question. If a current investor, the term she's saying that they can basically sell their investment to any third party. And in that case, like I really appreciate that this particular slide, if they decide to sell to a strategic investor who happens to be a major player in the industry, that would potentially block my future exit routes. But it's such a common term now, of course, as an investor, I want to have the right to sell to whoever I can negotiate a deal to in the future. I don't want to get out this season. So what's your suggestion in terms of negotiating this?
Well, I think also you have to remember that both the founders and the investors should have the same objectives at the end of the day. And if the investors think that an exit's the appropriate one, it's probably in the best interest of the founders also, I'm assuming.
But are you not talking about an exit so much as just the investor selling their minority investment to somebody else? Is that what you're focusing on? Just a minority investor being able to sell to like a strategic?
Yeah, I mean, like a VC investor, in the term sheet, they say, they can sell it to a third party with 3 notice. And I'm going to, well, because of this particular thing, and maybe getting, red flag, what should I negotiate from someone?
It depends on the context, but obviously if they're just selling a small investment, it's one thing, and I would think you need some protections. If they're your main investor and they want an exit, I mean, you're not going to have as much leverage on that.
So I think we're going to keep moving, but we're going to be around a little bit afterwards. We could certainly talk about that more. So we already touched on this to some extent, contracts and particular provisions. So these are the contracts that we're talking about right now with your customers, with your vendors, with your partners, strategic partners, and the sorts of provisions that you need to be careful with that can get you into trouble. What we talked about, exclusivity provisions. Bart mentioned rights of first refusal. If a strategic partner wants a right of first refusal on exit, that is potentially a problem and could definitely chill your exit opportunities. And that's the sort of thing you'd want to think long and hard about before you give it to them. But not everything is so severe. The first one, anti-assignment clauses. This is a little bit more mundane, but still can be important. If you have contracts with all of your important customers, and they have a provision that says that that contract cannot be assigned to another party without their consent, well, that may prevent you from doing an asset sale, and depending on how the provision is worded, possibly a stock sale, without going to all of those customers and getting their consent to the deal. That could be a real problem, because if you have very advantageous contracts with those parties, they may use that opportunity to renegotiate those contracts. Or they may not want to give their consent because they think they can get a better deal somewhere else. Or the buyer may say, oh, this is a real headache. This is going to be a problem. It could knock down the purchase price, or it could delay the deal. I mean, there are any number of ways that that situation could go south over what seems like a rather mundane provision. It's back in the boilerplate, it's assignment, people don't always take it that seriously. This is when it matters. This is when it matters. Long-term leases. Here's an example where it depends on who the buyer is and why they're buying your company. If the buyer is buying you because they want you as a going concern and they want your operations to fold into what they're doing, well, they may be delighted that you have that advantageous 10-year lease wherever it is. But if all they want is your technology and your team, and they couldn't care less about your operations, the fact that you've got a sweet 10-year lease in Pittsburgh may be a real problem to them, you know, and that's gonna become a liability for you. So again, it depends. It goes to what you're selling and what they're buying, whether these things matter or not. Anyway.
I would just say on it, the assignment clauses, but if you look at it from the customer's perspective, they may have a good business reason why it's important to them to have some sort of control, because they may be happy to be dealing with you and your company. They don't necessarily want that to be automatically, you know, sold to some other company, which they may not like so much. They might view as an 800-pound gorilla in the industry, and they really don't want to deal with them. So again, it does seem sort of prosaic and boilerplate, but you know, your customers really may care about it. So you do have to deal with this issue. You might as well try to deal with it sooner than later. But I can just see where some customers say, not so fast. I do want control over who my contract is.
Yeah.
Aren't there some structural legal nuances here, though, with respect to the purchase of assets versus the purchase of stock?
Yeah.
So if you purchase the stock, there's no technical assignment. It's still the same legal entity that's obliged to provide services under the agreement or under a lease, which might have a non-assignment provision as well.
But there may be a change of control provision.
That's right, but you have to, I mean, my point is you have to work with counsel to understand what the legal constraints are, and there may be structural ways of addressing this without disrupting the transaction.
Yeah, I think that's true. The bottom line is, don't be surprised by what's in your agreements. When you are entering into agreements with counterparties, you should know what's in those agreements. You should work with counsel, and you know what if you're negotiating away positions, know what you're giving up and how it could impact you down the line. Personnel issues. As I noted in the beginning, employees are rarely unimportant in a transaction. Whether the buyer is interested in your revenue stream, or interested in your IP, or interested in whatever it is, employees are going to be important in the deal. And so it's something to think about earlier rather than later, because there may be ways to structure employee retention long before a deal is in place that will save you money at the end of the day. What are the tools to think about in terms of employee retention? Well, the first two we know here, vesting periods and acceleration provisions. If your employees are getting equity in the company, structure the vesting in a way that they will hopefully be around through the exit and afterwards. So when I talk about vesting provisions with my clients, 4 years is pretty much industry standard. But I'll say to think about what your long-term strategy is. How long is it going to take you to get to an exit? Well, if that client knows it's going to be 5 years before they get to an exit, they might want to consider not putting in a 4-year vesting schedule in their equity plans, because just at the point when they may be approaching an exit, all their employees are fully vested and are able to walk out the door. And then you may have to find a way to incentivize them to stay, which with retention bonuses. But that's more money out of your pocket. So again, this is something, if you think about early on, it may save you money down the line. Same thing with acceleration provisions. Double trigger acceleration means that employees will accelerate, in order to accelerate their vesting, not only is the company sold, but they have to be terminated within 1 year of that sale. So again, that's another provision that keeps them around after the sale without you having to pay more money out of your pocket. Other things to think about in terms of employment, making sure you have proper NDA, invention assignment, non-competition agreements, work for hire agreements. All of these will be very important to the buyer. Because, anything else?
Well, I would just reiterate something, sort of a theme that we said is, for those kind of things, these work for hire agreements or invention assignment agreements, they're not particularly difficult to obtain while the person's working for you. In sort of the normal course of their hiring, it should just be really part of their employment agreement. But it's very difficult to obtain once you have a deal on the table, you're trying to sell the company, and especially difficult to obtain from former employees. And believe me, the buyer is going to want to see that. They're not only going to care about the people who work for you now, but what about that guy who left last year? Did he have a work for hire? Or did he develop some IP for you and now he might potentially own it? That's not a conversation you want to have. So again, something to really bear in mind as you're adjusting your normal daily hiring is, and again, any good employment agreement will provide for this, but it's not something you want to deal with once you're actually looking at an exit.
But I will tell you, it comes up.
It comes up.
We have been in that situation where the buyer starts to, scratch the surface, and they see that there's an uncertain chain of title to IP, and boy, does that send a deal going sideways.
And if they still want to buy your business, they'll buy your business, but they'll also make you give them an indemnity. They may ask for an escrow. They may ask for a holdback. They may ask for all sorts of economic penalties because of that. So, a word to the wise.
Alan, can you give us a quick survey through tax issue, personnel tax?
Sure, I think, the first one, the scenario of employee versus contractor. And I think, that's certainly coming to the forefront today, especially everyone's read what's going on with Uber around the globe. So that's something you certainly want to consider when you have early stage employees in your company, especially as you're a little bit cash strapped. The next issue, relative to incentive plans. In most startup organizations, your key employees are given stock awards, and you want to make sure that they're not burdened with a tremendous stock liability, tremendous tax liability, especially as those shares vest. So you want to make sure that your employees are aware of 83B elections, and you want to have a 409A valuation done. And those are things that are very easy to do as your company's in its formative years, and especially when the stock has little or no value, and your employees are not going to be saddled with a major tax liability. Quick enough?
That was real fast. Well done. We have 2 more slides. We've talked around this a little bit. Protecting IP. I know many of you, again, have technology companies. IP may be the critical asset in the sale, so protecting it is critically important. We talked about this first issue, weaknesses in the IP chain of title. Bart touched on this. That could come up a number of ways. He was talking about agreements with your employees, but it could be the software, the company that does your software development. There are any number of points where, or it could be the deal that Bart and I had, where IP was supposed to have been transferred from one affiliated company to another, but it hadn't been properly transferred. It became a big tax issue because that transfer had not been properly done at the point when the IP had limited value. But 3 years, 4 years later, the IP has significant value, and then you're trying to transfer it, and you have a huge tax problem. So again, the subtitle, time is not your friend. If that IP had been transferred at the right time, it was a non-issue. When you're trying to transfer it a couple weeks before a sale, heaven help you. Founders should have signed over their IP. Again, an easy thing to do if you do it in the beginning, but a huge tax problem if you don't. Or if one of the founders has left, an even bigger problem. Proper employee documents, Bart touched on that. Patents, trademarks, and copyrights properly registered. Policing your rights. If you do not go after people who are infringing your IP rights, your rights have been weakened. Adverse possession. IP, intellectual property, it's property just like real property. Same as if you let someone live on the corner of your property for several years without kicking them out. If you let someone infringe your IP for years on end without telling them to knock it off, your rights have been weakened. Your buyer will realize that and it'll go against you. Proper policies and procedures with respect to open source, procedures for protection of trade secrets, and generally your agreements should have proper protection of your IP rights. They should always, if you're in the business of, if you sell or license IP, an IP lawyer should be looking over all your agreements with your customers.
Yeah, and I guess I just add that, of course, you mentioned that tech companies in particular should be focused on this, of course, and I know this audience is tech focused, but in fact, IP is for everyone. And I know in the services industry, there's tons of IP that's developed all the time. And I'm sure in many other businesses, more and more IP has become an important asset in your portfolio. So I just want to make it clear that it's not just a tech thing, and everybody should be focused on protecting their IP these days. It's can be a very valuable asset.
Alan, Steve? All right, last topic. Corporate lawyers' favorite topic: compliance with securities laws. Again, this is kind of in the category of issue spotting. We could spend several hours talking about this and not scratch the surface. The takeaway about securities laws is that whenever you are issuing equity in your company, whether you are a one-person startup or a public company, and whether the equity is going to a founder, to an employee, to an investor, to a vendor, whatever, whenever you are issuing equity, if that issuance is not registered or exempt, and when I say exempt, I mean subject to an exemption that you have identified and complied with. Again, if it's not registered or exempt, then it is an illegal offering. And as an illegal offering, you are in violation of the securities laws. That potentially makes you subject to enforcement actions, criminal and civil penalties, or rescission actions, basically giving it back, giving the investor back their money. So violations of the securities laws can be more serious or less serious, depending on the situation. But generally speaking, the securities laws are not difficult to comply with as long as you do it timely and as long as you focus on it. But the main thing is to recognize...
Well, and if you're not doing a public offering.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming here that we're talking to people that are largely going to be doing exempt offerings. They're going to be doing a reg deal, 506 deal, maybe or a crowdfunding, or if you issue equity to your employees under Rule 701, that's very easy. There are a lot of exemptions that are pretty easy to comply with, but the important thing is to recognize that even if it's an oral commitment, you say to this guy who wrote a piece of code for you, thanks for doing that, I can't pay you, but I'm going to give you a 1% interest in the company. You have issued securities to that person. And potentially, if that issuance is not properly documented or not subject to a proper exemption, that may be a violation of the securities laws. Now, is that going to get you into trouble? Maybe not, but maybe. So the thing is, focus on the fact that whenever you're issuing equity, anyone for any reason, that's covered by the securities laws, and make sure you're at least speaking with your lawyer about it.
And again, it may be something that a potential buyer looks at when they're looking at buying your company. Well, how was the equity issued in the first place? Did you comply?
Yeah, I mean that's when it becomes an issue, when you're trying to sell your company or when you're going public, and buyer's counsel is going back through the paperwork and want to see that all the T's are crossed and I's dotted, and and all the equity is properly issued, and, you know, you there going, well, gee, I guess we didn't really, you know, we didn't have to talk to our lawyer about that one. You know, is it going to queer the deal? Not necessarily, but it for sure can cause a problem. So again, the lesson, consult with your lawyer from the beginning. With that, we're a little bit past 8 o'clock, but we could take a couple of questions.
So I'm curious, so I'm also doing a startup, so what kind of value will secured assets, this real estate or maybe something of that sort will have values on the M&As if I were to do one? Is that going to increase the valuations upfront?
I don't understand the question.
So if you have secured assets in our company,
So you own real estate?
whilst I'm a startup, so I want to buy real estate, so I don't want to rent, basically that's it.
Okay.
I just want to buy it, the assets. So will that put some effect on the valuations upfront, like when I'm doing M&A?
Probably not, because most startups will put, you know, the real estate in a separate company, and that's probably not the operating company that, you know, someone's going to want to buy. But, you know, once again, it depends on where the real estate is, the value of it, but, you know, an operating company probably is not interested in the real estate.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, it's interesting because Stephen mentioned infrastructure before, and I guess there's infrastructure and infrastructure.
That's right. I mean, it depends what kind of company, but we're here in a technology forum. If we have drugstores, department stores that are sitting on real estate, and there's a hidden value in those assets, but the book value that's on the accounts on the balance sheet may not reflect its current fair market value. So there may be value there, but I think the question you're asking, Alan answered, that's not going to be a bump up in value. And it's a deployment of capital that's probably inefficient because it's not focused on the area where you have subject matter expertise and want to drive the startup from a technology perspective. So it's probably value dilutive.
Well, the reason why I say is because there could be certain areas that are up for developments, which means the property market can go up, and it's going up every day. So, won't that be a little helpful? I can ask later.
So one of the slides where we said let's focus on the buyers and what they're likely to think about what value is. I'm not sure what the nature of your technology is, but I would think highly unlikely that they would spend much time focusing on a real estate portfolio that you have. It may be beneficial for you to rent real estate or put in a separate subsidiary if you think it's a good investment personally, and then rent it from that entity.
I think what my colleagues are suggesting is the buyers are really going to be focused on your core. That's what they're going to care about.
VC funds are not in the business of investing in real estate. I mean, if you want to use it as a hedge, so instead of paying rent, you're paying rent to yourself and you're building up the appreciation value of the real estate, that's fine. But that's probably not what a venture capitalist wants to invest in.
I'll talk to you later, I guess, but
So
we were.
we should go on. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, so I think we're only 5 minutes over, or 7 minutes over. So a big round of applause.